And it's Nardwuar, the human serviette from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, coming to you from Tweech, the platform known as Tweech. It's me, Nardwuar, the human serviette, presenting to you viewers Nardwuar's Video Vault. And today, coming up shortly, an interview with Chris Murdoch, all about his amazing pamphlet, Black Dots, an Afropunk primer. Chris Murdoch coming up on the Nardwuar, the human serviette Video Vault on Tweech. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to Tweech. I really appreciate the support that you have given me. Who are you?
I'm Chris Murdoch from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Also known as R. Stevie Moore.
Well, I was in a band called Out of Controller, who still exists, and we have a song about R. Stevie Moore. Are you an R. Stevie Moore fan, Nardwuar?
Amazing! And you are reading a Batman? What's the Batman on the cover you're reading? You're reading a magazine.
Yeah, it was. I can't take credit for the idea. It was my bandmates, but we were just kind of, the cover is us on a couch watching TV, and I wanted to spice up the cover, I guess, a little bit. And someone in the band handed me a Batman comic. I think so. I think maybe The Killing Joke. The one about the one about the Joker, quote unquote. But I'm reading that one on the cover. So hopefully nobody sues us for that one.
And that's Out of Controller, but as well, you cover the nerves. You cover the nerves.
Absolutely, yeah. We before we put out the Television Zombie LP, we had a cassette that was released while I was in the band called Remote Control, which was a lot of fun to record. And there's a couple covers on that, and one of them is a Nerves cover.
Out of Controller. Aquaculture.
Who are still active, and they're very good. I was going to say that Out of Controller are still active. I only left the band because I had children and couldn't commit the way I wanted to. But Out of Controller are still making records. They put out an amazing record just last year called Sure Thing, and they're amazing. And they still are playing shows, or will be, hopefully, once this pandemic comes to an end.
What can you say about Aquaculture and Pay It Forward? Your good friend was involved.
Yeah, Aquaculture is a rapper. His real name is Lance Sampson. He's an incredible human being. I've gotten to know him a lot better in the last couple of years. And he's just, he's done some incredible things for the hip hop scene here in Halifax. He, a few years ago, started playing shows with a full band, which I feel is kind of unusual in hip hop. And I had a lot of friends who played in his band, and the shows were just incredible. There's a lot of great live footage online for people who may not be familiar. And he made a music video for the song Pay It Forward. And my wife, Stephanie Johns, was one of the people who worked on the video. And she's watching right now, so I better make sure I get my information right.
What exactly is going on in this photo right here? What is going on? Can Stephanie possibly step in a room and explain what is going on? Explain, Chris, what's happening right now.
Well, Stephanie is upstairs, and our kids are sleeping. But if she wants to come down here, I think that would be great. That's completely up to her. But that looks like, Nardwuar, it is a picture of you interviewing Stephanie's old band, the Stolen Minks, and she did mention to me that you interviewed them, and they were very, very happy to talk to you.
And they gave me like a special furry case to hold stuff, which is amazing. Is Stephanie around? Is she around? Can we get her eventually to come down? Stephanie, if you're watching this is amazing. The Stolen Minks. The Stolen Minks. You have to text.
I'm going to tell her to come on down. I did. I just texted her, Nardwuar. I'm gonna unlock this door. I want her to come down. Give me 1 second.
And again, we're speaking here to Chris, who put out this amazing Black Dots and Afropunk primer. But right now, we're talking about the Stolen Minks. What can you say about the Stolen Minks, in case people are wondering?
The Stolen Minks were a really phenomenal band from Halifax. I saw them a couple of times. The first time I saw them, I was still in high school. So it was an early show for me. And at some points, the band was made up of 3 members who are pictured here. That's my wife, Stephanie, who's right next to you, and then Erica Butler, the drummer, and Tina Johns, the bass player. And at a different time in the band, they had a keyboard player, Rochelle. But instead of hearing about it from me, you should hear about it from Stephanie.
Hello, Stephanie! From CITR to Halifax and back to CITR, kind of.
Yes.
I
actually worked with
a bit closer. We can't hear you totally, Stephanie.
Oh, sorry.
What is going on here, Stephanie? Please explain. Just
you want to sit down?
No, okay. So when we were on tour, I think it was like 2009, and you didn't think we were going to come in, but we did.
Oh, I thought you'd probably phone in. So you just showed up.
Yeah, but we came in. Yeah, it was like our whole days. Yeah, that's all we did.
I remember you gave me like a cool CD holder, a cool furry CD holder. Do you remember the cool?
Yeah, we made those. We made those all by hand before the tour.
So how did the tour go? I talked to you up until the tour, but how did the rest of the tour go? What happened in the last 12 years of your life, 11 years?
Not too much. The tour went well. I keep playing music sometimes, and we have a couple of crazy kids, and that's basically what we've been doing.
Stephanie, thank you so much for remembering me on CITR radio and preserving this picture, the Stolen Minks. That's amazing. And you gave me a gift. I still have that gift. I wish I could run and find it. I think it's somewhere, but I won't bore you with that. But I love the do you remember the furry CD case that you had?
I do. Yeah, I do. We made all of those by hand. I think we screen printed patches and then sewed it on cases. And we had a lot of that stuff back then.
And now as we return to Chris, what can you say about Chris? What can you say about Chris?
What can't I say about Chris?
Uh-oh.
He's the best.
I was going to ask about Chad Peck from Kestrels.
Yeah.
We are big Chad Peck fans in this house.
Yeah, he's a great guy too.
And
he was involved in Brain Amp?
Yeah, he recorded the only Brain Amp release that exists, and his brother Devin Peck has played in many bands, most of them much better than Brain Amp, but he did play in Brain Amp with me and another guy named Brendan Naima, and Chad was kind enough to record us. I think that was in 2007.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for joining us. I really appreciate that. And coming downstairs. And thank you for the gift. In 1999, the Stolen Minks! Amazing! And Stephanie, Doot-doo-loot-doo. Doot-doo-loot-doo. So, Raymond was the catalyst for your pamphlet. What can you say about the pamphlet that I talked about? He had done some artwork before on some stuff of your friends' bands. Like, how did he know you? I noticed his artwork is, in the New York Times. He's done some band artwork, right?
He has, and it's funny, Nardwuar, because the pamphlet really just started as I guess you could say kind of an art project I was doing on Instagram. I just wanted to post a picture of a different Black punk rock musician basically for every day in February, and it wasn't supposed to be anything more than that. And I did that, and then some folks in Halifax asked me if I would turn it into a speaking show, which I did, and I did a few things with that. I was able to travel around and give a few presentations, which was awesome. And then pretty much shortly after the pandemic struck, which I guess was exactly 1 year ago or thereabouts, Raymond, who I knew from his band, the Famines, had played in Halifax. And I believe I knew him from a mutual friend, our friend Paul Hammond, who's been in a lot of bands. I don't know 100%. It's kind of I know it was a friend of a friend, right? It's sort of the musician circle kind of thing. So I didn't know him well, but he reached out to me, and I was familiar with his artwork and things like that. He's a brilliant artist, and he just asked if I would be at all interested in turning the Black Dots presentation into a pamphlet. And he said he would be happy to create it and send me a bunch of copies that I could give out. And of course, the end result ends up looking like this. I know that he was kind enough to send one to you. So I really have him to thank for talking to you right now, which is amazing for me, Nardwuar. I'm a huge fan of yours and I've been watching you for years. But anyway, he's the one who reached out to me with the idea. It was very little work on my end. I just had to write up a few things about some musicians. I kind of just was forced to edit myself. Instead of talking about 100 different people, I really, had to focus it just on 4 or 5 to make it into a small little pamphlet. And initially, I just wanted him to send me about 25 copies, and I was going to give them out for free just to whoever I thought in my friend group might want one. But around this time, a lot was happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And here in Nova Scotia, there's a Black Lives Matter Solidarity Fund. So we had the idea of selling the pamphlets just for $2 a piece to anyone who would want one. And any money that I made through my private selling of them, I would donate to the fund. And then he did the same thing. So wherever they went in the world, the money went directly to that Black Lives Matter Solidarity Fund until a certain point. And we were able to raise a few $1,000s for the fund, which was fantastic.
The response has been amazing, hasn't it?
Response has been really, really good.
And people can still order it now, right? People can still order the pamphlet now, right?
Absolutely. If you, I can't remember the exact URL off the top of my head, but
through the magic of Tweech, we can post that URL in the chat.
Sounds good. I love it. Sounds good. If you Google Pentagon Black, you'll find Raymond's website, and it's pretty easy to find the pamphlet on the website, and you can order as many copies as you would like.
Thank you, Megan.
Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
I don't know, Nardwuar. I'm not picking up on this one.
Megan took you to your first gig.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, she did. That's right. Megan Blumenthal, who I still know. She took me to my very first show in May 2000. So I've been going to shows for 21 years now. Which seems wild. I was 13 at the time, Nardwuar, and I had been watching you on TV for many years. I was already a very big fan of yours. And I was obsessed with rock music, which of course kind of led to this whole Black Dots thing, because I was feeling a little bit alienated as a Black person who was really into rock music, because people were telling me that I wasn't supposed to do that. But anyway, Megan was kind enough to, she saw that I was interested in music. She mentioned to me that there were all ages shows in Halifax, which of course, being 13 years old at the time, I had no idea that that was something that existed. She took me to an all-ages venue called the Pavilion. The building still exists, but they don't really do shows there anymore, as far as I know. Hopefully that will change. But that's where I went for many, many, many years going to shows. But yeah, she took me to my very first one, and I was elated, absolutely elated, and have never stopped going to shows since.
Chris Murdoch, thank you, Urban Peasant.
Urban Peasant was a pop punk band from Cole Harbour. Cole Harbour is a suburb of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, which is where I'm from and where I'm speaking to you from right now. And they were a 3-piece band. I was a big fan when I was 13, 14 years old. They all went on to form different bands afterwards, but they were quite a big deal to me when I was a young man.
And they were one of the bands that opened for Gob, along with Envision, yes. Right? So it's Gob, Envision, Urban Peasant. That's your roots, yes. Isn't it?
Absolutely, that's my roots. That would be October of 2000. That's another show I was at with Megan. And Urban Peasant opened, and I was already a huge fan, so I love them. Then Envision played, and Envision is basically the brainchild of one of my best friends on the planet, Ian Hart, who was in the band No Offense, who I know you and I were talking a little bit about earlier, Nardwuar. And Envision played, and I loved them. And then I ended up joining Envision, and technically Envision never broke up, but Envision started in 1997, 1998. And then I joined the band in 2007, I believe. And here it is, 2021. And technically I'm still in the band. So, and that was the band I first did a tour with. That was the band I first released vinyl with. That was the band I did everything with. And it's all thanks to Ian. And again, it's a band that I saw as a child. I was 13 years old. And then I ended up joining and going on a US tour and doing all these things I never thought I'd be able to do. And then when Envision stopped playing, Gob took the stage, who I was a huge fan of, and Nardwuar. I do remember when I bought Gob's CD, Too Late No Friends, which I still think is a great release. I was super excited the first time I listened to it because, of course, at the end of the album, there is a hidden track that features you broadcasting from CITR. So that's one of the first times I heard you sort of not on TV. And that's the first time I ever heard of CITR.
I forgot about that, or I didn't know about that. Thank you, Gob. Thank you, Gob. Thank you, Gob. And also, Envision did a Judge cover, didn't they? That tormented you, didn't it? A Judge cover. A Judge. Not many people at that time would go to a Gob gig and expect a Judge cover, would they?
No, definitely not. And I love the band Judge now, but at the time I was not familiar with them. And I don't honestly, Nardwuar, I don't think I even knew that they covered Judge at that show, but if they did, that's awesome.
The Garbage Disposal Unit.
Amazing. Yeah, that was the band. Garbage Disposal Unit was me and a couple of the guys from Invasion of Privacy and this other guy named Keith. I'm not sure whatever became of him. And that was the first band I ever played a proper show with. And I sang a Dead Kennedys cover at that show. And that was my first time singing in front of people. And I was very nervous, but somehow we pulled it off.
Chris Murdoch. And we're here with Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots, an Afropunk primer. Yeah. East meets West right there. Live. Are we live now, Chris? We are live, aren't we?
We are live, Nardwuar.
We are live right now. And I was curious, Chris, have you seen the movie? It's free on the internet. Moving Towards Tolerance, Bronwyn and Jaffa.
Okay, you know what? I have to admit I have never seen it, and I'm ashamed I've never seen it because I'm a Haligonian, and it's an important movie about a lot of actions that were taken by people in the Halifax punk scene to fight against issues of racism and discrimination. And I should have messaged friends of mine to ask them for a link to the film. And I've always meant to, and I keep forgetting what the film is called, but it doesn't matter. I should have messaged people to find it and watch it. I've done a lot of searching on YouTube using keywords and stuff, knowing that the video is on YouTube, but I keep forgetting what it's called. So I'm ashamed that I haven't seen it, but you know the name, and now it's stuck in my head. Moving Towards Tolerance. I'm going to have to. It's
actually, if you just go,
that I haven't seen it yet.
It's actually not on YouTube for free.
Oh.
It's not on YouTube, but
okay.
it's free at the National Film Board site in Canada. So if people right now want to leave Nardwuar, well, don't leave Nardwuar. I'm talking to Chris Murdoch, author of an Afropunk primer, Black Dots. But if people Google Bronwyn and Jaffa in usual Google, the first thing that comes up is the movie, free. You can watch the movie free right now on the National Film Board site. And Bronwyn is spelled Bronwen, and Jaffa, Yaffa. Bronwyn and Jaffa. So just Google Bronwyn and Jaffa, and that'll link you to that movie from 1996. And it's free. People can watch it right now.
Thank you, Nardwuar, because I really, really, really need to see that movie.
Or people can order right now this actual primer, Black Dots, an Afropunk primer by Chris Murdoch. And right off the bat, I would like to ask you, Chris, Tony Young. Could you say a bit about Tony Young?
I would love to. Yeah, Tony Young is a person who I think a lot of people don't know about, even people who are big fans of Discord Records and the DC hardcore scene, just like I am. Tony Young was a young Black woman who was a musician. She was a bass player, and she was in the band Red Sea. So people who are familiar with the Flex Your Head compilation on Discord Records are probably familiar with the band Red Sea. They never had a proper release, unfortunately. Like a release of their own, but they do have, I believe, 4 songs featured on the Flex Your Head compilation. They have a song called Jimmy, and an ode to Jimi Hendrix, who I know Ian Mackay is a fan of, and I believe Tony is a fan of as well. And it's just kind of them riffing on the main riff from the song Hey Joe. by Jimi Hendrix. But Red Sea is probably best known for the song Pressure's On, which is a song about police harassment. If people want to get more information on Tony Young, there's an amazing book called Dance of Days, which is all about the DC punk and hardcore scene in the basically all throughout the 80s. There's some great information on her there. And if you want to see Tony Young, you can find some pictures of her online, but also if you search Minor Threat Filler on YouTube, you can find a video of Minor Threat performing the song Filler at DC Space, I think in 82 or 83. And when the song starts, Ian MacKaye starts calling out, Tony, Tony, Tony. And then Tony gets on stage and she helps to sing the song Filler, which is just awesome. Unfortunately, Tony Young passed away due to complications of pneumonia, I believe sometime in the early to mid 90s. But she's a super inspirational person. Before she was playing in a band, she was, I believe, booking shows and really doing a lot to promote the punk scene in DC, as a Black woman. And people don't associate Black women with punk rock, but I think that they should. And I just think Tony's really cool and very inspirational.
McRad and Bubba Dupree.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. I did forget one thing though, Nardwuar, and I'm sorry. Just for anyone who'd like to know, Red Sea, who featured Tony Young, also featured Thomas Squibb, who went on to sing in this band, Beef Eater, probably one of the strangest bands on the Discord catalog. And Beef Eater also featured Fred Smith, who's pictured right here, who is another Black punk rocker from DC, known for being very outspoken and a little bit unusual. And he added a lot to the band Beef Eater. His guitar playing is extremely unique. He unfortunately was murdered a few years ago, but he left quite a big imprint on DC. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned him and Beef Eater, who I think are a great band and have a connection to Red Sea. In terms of McRad and Bubba Dupree, McRad is a really cool early 80s hardcore punk rock band, which features a guy by the name of Chuck Treece. And Chuck Treece is interesting because he is a punk musician, mostly known for his band McRad, but also he is a very accomplished studio musician and skateboarder. And I mentioned some of that in this pamphlet, but Chuck has quite a story to tell. So I only touch on the surface of it in the pamphlet. What do I want to say about Chuck? Chuck, I believe, was the first African-American skateboarder ever to have the cover of Thrasher magazine, and perhaps one of the earliest sponsored African-American skateboarders. But he still skateboards today. As I mentioned, he went on to have a brilliant career as a session musician, which I believe is still his main source of income. And, I don't know him personally at all, but by all accounts, just a wonderful human being, an extremely talented guy. There are some great videos of him on YouTube as well, him laying down some tracks in the studio, and of course him skateboarding. And Bubba Dupree, who was also featured in this pamphlet, was the guitar player for an incredible band known as Void, who were also on Discord Records. Even though they weren't from Washington, D.C., they were from Columbia, Maryland, but it's close enough to Washington that they were allowed to be on the Discord roster. Probably one of the best hardcore punk bands of all time, at least in my opinion, and a band that is widely known for adding the element of pure, unfiltered noise to hardcore and punk rock. Already a noisy form of music for sure, but Bubba Dupree in particular, who was of mixed race, was known for some of the weird things he would do on guitar and just creating just this rattling, screaming noise using his guitar and his amplifier, and it just became part of Void's sound. It's very distinct. That's what I have to say about Bubba Dupree. I know that as they furthered in their career, they kind of morphed into somewhat of more of a metalish band. They have a record called Potion of Bad Dreams, which is known to be quite a bit different from their other releases. And of course, this happens a lot with 80s hardcore bands. They turn into metal bands. The same thing happened with SSD and so many other bands. But Bubba has gone on to have a long career in music. He's been a part of a few projects. I know that he collaborated in more recent years with Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters and Nirvana on some of his, I believe his Probot project. Bubba's on there. And speaking of Dave Grohl played drums in the band Scream. And this is an early Scream record. And Scream featured a man by the name of Skeeter Thompson, who is pictured right here, another Black punk rocker from DC. And as I mentioned, this record is their first record, Still Screaming. It's a hardcore classic. Dave Grohl is not on this record, but in the mid 80s, Dave joined Scream. And if you watch the Smells Like Teen Spirit music video by Nirvana, of course, you'll notice that Dave is wearing a pocket print Scream t-shirt as an homage to the band in that video. So that's pretty cool.
Amazing info that people can check out in the Black Dots, an Afropunk primer pamphlet available now, where people can actually click and buy. And I was wondering, so much great stories are in this. It's quite compelling the way you've condensed all this. It's amazing. I wanted it to go on and on and on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's amazing. Around you have all these records. I was wondering, could you grab some of the records that you have? Like, you have a whole bunch. Could you just go through them? Like, I think it mentioned Bad Brains. That's a big chunk. Do you have a big chunk? Bad Brains, Black Dots.
I would love to show a big chunk. I have Bad Brains, Black Dots right here. Life-changing record for me. One of, if not their first recorded performance captured on tape. You know what I mean? Like one of the first recordings in existence of them playing. This was recorded by Don Zientara, who anyone familiar with Discord Records will know is sort of the guy. He's still making records right now at Inner Ear Studios in Washington, D.C., but all the D.C. bands, Minor Threat, Scream, Bad Brains, the list goes on. Don recorded all of them. Fugazi, of course, he recorded, I believe, all the Fugazi records. And what's kind of interesting about this particular record is that it's not heavily produced. It's a very raw recording, and the Bad Brains sort of piled into Don's home, and he recorded them all in different areas of the house. So the bass player, Daryl Jennifer, I believe, was upstairs in the attic. Guitar player, Dr. No, real name Gary Miller, I think was in a bathroom. I think the drummer, Earl Hudson, was in the basement. And HR, the legendary singer of the Bad Brains, actually recorded his vocals for this record outside. He was just outside the back door. And there are a couple songs on here where if you listen, you can hear little kids speaking to him between takes because he was just standing outside of the house screaming. So the kids weren't really sure what was going on. They were asking him what he was doing. And I think it's pretty cool that you can hear some of that on this record. And of course, this record is where the name of my pamphlet comes from.
Bad Brains, though, are one of the most intense bands ever. Like, nobody is more intense than HR. They're like the best, aren't they? Like, people should Google like 1982 Bad Brains. Could you describe, like, they're the best? Like, give up. Everybody should just give up after watching that. That's what I felt like while looking at. Like, it's the best. It is the best.
I agree. I think the Bad Brains are the best band to ever exist. They have a monumental influence on my life, which sounds very silly to say, but again, I was doing a lot of soul searching as a young teenager who loved punk rock, but I didn't see anybody who looked like me in punk rock. And again, was being told time and time again to my face that I did not belong in punk rock. There was no space for me there because of the color of my skin. And then, of course, I don't remember how I found out about the Bad Brains. I think it actually might have been Spin magazine, but I discovered this all-black punk band, not only an all-black punk band, but a band that allegedly was extremely good and changed the entire course of this music, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I listened to them, they blew my mind, and I've just been a diehard fan ever since. I think the Bad Brains are, I know I'm not the only one who thinks this, but I think they are the best band ever. I've never seen them, but I wish that I had. And before this pamphlet came out, I was doing a speaking presentation about Black Dots, and as you can imagine, quite a large portion of that presentation was about the Bad Brains, specifically what they did for punk rock, what they did in terms of creating hardcore, what they did in terms of booking shows in Washington, D.C. area, what they did about encouraging other people, whether they be white or black or anyone, to pick up instruments and start a band. I don't know. I just have, there are a couple blemishes on the band's career for sure, but I think, I have overwhelmingly positive things to say about the Bad Brains, and literally they changed my whole life. So they're a big deal to me.
When the Bad Brains played, like when I looked at the footage from 1982, there were a few black punks in the audience. And did they get many black punks out to the gigs, or a black audience at all?
One of the things I mentioned in my Black Dot speaking presentation is the fact that the Bad Brains realized that a lot of the audiences they were performing to were largely white, which was fine, but they also wanted to make sure that they had that they were getting the message back to their own community. I'm from Atlantic Canada, so I don't know that much about Washington, D.C., and don't feel like I have authority to say much about it. But I do know, my understanding is that for years, it was one of the most racially segregated cities in America. And I know that a lot of white people who live in Madams, Oregon and areas like that, would not venture over to some of the housing projects where a lot of Black people in DC live. So there are some really amazing photos online from that Dance of Days book that I mentioned that I show in my presentation of the Bad Brains playing shows in the housing projects to an almost entirely Black audience of like little kids. It's really moving. It's incredible to me that they made sure to do this, to make sure the message was given back to their own community. I'm not sure how many people in that audience like the Bad Brains. It mentions in that Dance of Days book that, a lot of the kids kind of enjoyed the spectacle and it was a little bit too loud for them and they were plugging their ears and they had fun, but I don't know how much they enjoyed the punk rock and hardcore, but some of them did. And my understanding is that a couple of those kids went on to form bands. And of course, a lot of the bands I've already talked to you about with Black punks in them are from Washington, D.C. I'm not trying to make this whole thing about Washington, D.C., but just because of the population, that's where a lot of these kind of early 80s Black hardcore heroes tend to come from.
Dag Nasty and Death.
Let's talk about Dag Nasty and Death. Dag Nasty's original singer, who's pictured here, is a Black man named Sean Brown. And this is a record that a lot of Dag Nasty fans will be familiar with. It's simply entitled Dag with Sean. It's some of their first recordings with him. And again, he's pictured here on the back. He went on to form a band called Swiz, who are another one of my all-time favorite bands. But before Dag Nasty had Dave Smalley, who is the singer they're probably most well known for having. And of course, Dave went on to form many other bands. And then after Dave, there was Peter Kortner. They had a lot of singers in that band. But their first singer was Sean Brown, who, as I mentioned, went on to be in a band called Swiz. And honestly, I love Swiz so much that I think, if anyone is unfamiliar with these bands, if I'm going to recommend one of them to you, if you're only going to check out one, please check out this band. Just an incredible band, just some amazing lyrics, just musically. They're a hardcore band, but they incorporate a lot of other really interesting elements. They're certainly not what you would call a run-of-the-mill hardcore band. An interesting note about Swiz is that the initial band had 4 members and their original bass player was a guy named Nathan Larson, who went on to still has a career in the music industry as a producer, and he does a lot of film scoring. And he's also married to the singer from the Cardigans. Do you remember that band, the Cardigans? They had that song Love Fool in the 90s. He's married to, I think her name is Nina, but he's married to her. After he left.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say,
no, please,
before you get after he left, I didn't want to interrupt, but your Instagram name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My when he left the band to be in another band called Shudder to Think, who are one of only 2 Discord bands ever to leave Discord to go on a major label, the other one being Jawbox, who are a fantastic band. After he left, they got a new bass player called Dave and promptly released Swiz with Dave, which is a pretty apt title for that record. That's another phenomenal record. And then Swiz broke up in the early 90s, but then reformed in the mid-90s under a new name, Sweet Belly Freakdown. And my handle on Instagram, if anybody wants to get in touch with me for any reason, is Sweet Belly Freakdown.
And we're speaking right now to Chris Murdoch, author of the Afropunk Primer. And if anybody has any questions for Chris, feel free to @Nardwuar, and I will relay the questions to you, Chris. I will relay the questions to you.
I would love that. That sounds great.
Death, the band Death.
Mm-hmm. The band Death are an incredible band. They are known largely for this record for the whole world to see. They have a few other records which are comprised of sort of rarities and early recordings of theirs, but Death have an amazing story. There is a documentary on Death, which I believe is just called A Band Called Death, which you can find online. It's a very, very moving documentary. And the story of Death is Death were 3 brothers from Detroit, the Hackney brothers, who are pictured here. And they fell in love with rock and roll music. They were initially into soul and funk and disco and things like that, but they fell in love with rock and roll, which I think is really beautiful because it's the same situation with the Bad Brains. They were really into funk music. Daryl Jennifer used to play in an Earth, Wind, and Fire cover band and stuff before the Bad Brains. So Death have a similar trajectory. They got involved with rock music and they loved it. They formed a band so they could play rock music. And they encountered a lot of pushback from people who found it weird that three Black guys from Detroit were playing rock music and not playing like something more like Motown and things like that. And I guess probably the most well-known thing or the most interesting thing about Death is that they put out a record sometime in the late 70s. I can't remember exactly when their record came out. But sometime in I think the early 70s. I don't want to get this wrong, Nardwuar. Maybe it's listed here. Anyway, my apologies. Sometime I want to say in the early 70s, they put out their record and not much came of it. It didn't get a lot of promotion. People didn't know about it. And then Death kind of faded into obscurity. But then among record collector circles at some time, the record started getting passed around. And it's a brilliant record, so people were getting really excited about it. Who is this unknown band simply called Death? And then a lot of sort of a flurry of activity around the band. And unfortunately, one of the members passed away, but their children had a lot to do with sort of promoting the band. And now Death, again, it's the pandemic, so there's no shows. But until the pandemic struck, Death was still playing shows and are a band I very much want to see. But I really would encourage anybody who is even slightly interested to watch the documentary. It's called A Band Called Death. It'll do a much better job of telling you the story of Death than I'm doing right now. But anyway, I'm blanking on what I want to say. But Death are great, and I would encourage people to watch that movie.
We do have a question for you, Chris, from Il Hornet. And Il Hornet asks, can you tell us a bit about Pure Hell?
Absolutely. And it's funny that this question is coming in because Death, as I mentioned, their record, when it was released in the 70s, kind of fell flat, even though it's an amazing record because it wasn't promoted. And also because people did not take Death seriously because they were Black. I mean, that's just a fact. And Pure Hell were a punk band from Philadelphia who existed in the late 70s. And they were a great band. They were tight in those circles. They were friends with the Dead Boys. They were friends with Sid Vicious. They played CBGBs a lot. There's some great footage of them online too. Really into the punk fashion thing too, which I think shocked people to see Black guys wearing leather jackets and having dyed, green hair and weird sunglasses and lots of gear and stuff like that. They look great in their photos, and a great band too. They have a record, the Noise Addiction LP, which is great. But the reason why I'm sort of likening them to Death is that they ended up being managed by this guy. I can't remember his name. I think it's Curtis. I can't remember the last name, but he was the same guy who at one time managed Jimi Hendrix.
Curtis Knight.
Curtis Knight, thank you. And Curtis Knight's vision of Jimi Hendrix was that Jimi Hendrix was a novelty act because he was a Black person playing rock and roll, which Curtis Knight thought was completely ridiculous. And he thought that people would buy Jimi Hendrix records, not because Jimi Hendrix is really good, but because it would be this funny novelty thing they would have, like a joke. And then when he was managing Pure Hell, he was kind of looking on them as the same way. People aren't going to buy your record because you're any good. They're going to buy your record because it's laughable that four Black guys would be in a punk rock band. That was Curtis Knight's vision. He got in an argument with the band for that and many other reasons and ended up stealing the master reels of their tape for the Noise Addiction LP for like many decades. So Pure Hell, much like Death, recorded an amazing record that nobody heard for years and years and years down the line. But of course, it's available everywhere now, and people should listen to it because it's really, really good.
We're speaking here to Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots, an amazing pamphlet. And actually, Little Boy Big Trev says we need more historic pamphlets and pamphleteers. So that's directed towards you, Chris. Hooray for doing
Thank
this.
you.
Are you one of the first people ever to put out a pamphlet? Were there other pamphlets? I don't think there are many pamphlets about punk rock.
I don't know. And that's something I can't take credit for because I never would have done this if Raymond hadn't reached out to me. He and Pentagon Black have released some informational pamphlets. I don't know necessarily about music history, but they've released a lot of really cool informational pamphlets. They have a pamphlet on COVID-19 and how it's impacted touring. They're doing a lot of cool stuff over at Pentagon Black. But yeah, in terms of the pamphlet stuff, I don't know. I just feel really lucky that I was able to put it out and the people liked it. And then now I get to talk to you.
Chris, I was wondering, Hirax, metal blade. What can I say about Hirax? Metal blade, urban waste, metal. There's quite a bit of metal in there. The name Metal Blade.
Absolutely. I don't know much about Hirax. I do have one of the records though, Hate, Fear, and Power. And I do like it. I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of metal. The only metal labels I'm even aware of are Metal Blade and Roadrunner. I don't know really much. I'm not a big metal guy. I apologize. But, most people who are into metal probably know much more about this band than I do. But I was drawn to them because their singer is this guy right here, a black punk rocker. He's definitely into punk, even though it's in a metal band. His name is Caton DePina. And I just think it's remarkable that, that he's been so active in the metal scene for so many years. I believe he has a history in punk. I don't know that much about him because I don't know that much about Hirax, but Hate, Fear, and Power is a great record. His vocals are very distinct. They're not the growly vocals you would expect, but they're quite high, which is very similar to a really, really great New York hardcore band called Absolution, who existed in the mid to late 80s. And their singer was a guy by the name of Gingy Brown. And he was the son of Marion Brown, who was a very accomplished jazz saxophone player. He played with Miles Davis, played with everybody, has a lot of solo work of his own. So Gingy was kind of raised on jazz, but ended up fronting this hardcore band. But his vocals, much like Caton's vocals, are quite high. They're not what you would expect for that kind of band. And just in terms of talking about Black people in New York hardcore, I would be very remiss not to talk about one of the great New York hardcore bands, which is Urban Waste. In my mind, easily one of the best bands ever from New York, like top 5 New York bands, period. And their drummer, you can't see him very well in this picture, but their drummer is a black guy named John Dancy. And honestly, I don't know that much about the history of Urban Waste, but again, I just think if you're a fan of hardcore or punk in general, this is a band that you need to check out because they're excellent. Very, very good.
And again, we're speaking to Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots and Afropunk Primer, live on Tweet with me, Nardwuar, the Human Serviette. And if anybody has any questions for Chris, just at Nardwuar, I will relay them to Chris, just like I'm asking Chris right now about Jafet Koto.
Oh, yeah. Jafet Koto is another band I only know a little bit about, but they have a couple of great records on Ebullition Records, which was somewhat of a hardcore-esque record label back in the 90s.
Kent McCard. I love that label. I love that. He did also Heart Attack Fanzine. Do you remember Heart Attack Fanzine?
Yes, that's right. And again, I apologize for not knowing as much as I would like to about Jafet Koto. They're, of course, named after a black actor who was in Alien and many other movies. And I have their record Syncopated Synthetic Laments for Love here in front of me. But they have at least one other really, really great record. The name escapes me right now because it's long like this one. The first track on this record is a song called Circumstantial Evidence. It's probably one of the best songs I've ever heard in my life. And this band featured, a lot of artwork featuring young black children. And there is, of course, a black person in the band. I believe his real name is Mark Gillis. He goes by Mag in the band, and he's the guitar player and I believe primary songwriter, although I could be wrong about that. But Jafet Koto are they don't sound like the bands we were talking about before. They're a band, again, that, they existed further on into the 90s. So they have, I suppose a post-hardcore sound. Of course, these days the post-hardcore doesn't really mean anything, but it doesn't sound like a traditional punk band. It's more experimental, really screamy vocals, lots of interesting things going with guitar, but an excellent, excellent band.
There is also an actor, rest in peace, called Jafet Koto that just recently passed away on March the 15th.
Right. Yeah. And that's who they're named after. And he was in Alien and lots of other movies that I can't remember right now. But yes, 100%. That's where they got the name from.
Now, Chris, you are author of Black Dots, an Afropunk primer, but we did have a question, and I was wondering about this relating to this question. What is your favorite place to eat in your city? But I was going to actually ask that later to you. T-Dogs, No Name Cafe. What can you say about those places?
But No Name Cafe is a place that I had no idea existed until I started dating Stephanie, who was with us earlier. And she took me there a few times, and it was really cool. It was on Gottingen Street, which is a very well-known street here in Halifax. And I thought it was cool that the place literally didn't have a name. It was just sort of this cafeteria-style restaurant located in a bigger building, which has lots of medical offices and things like that in it. You just walk in the front entrance of this big building and turn right, and you're in this little cafeteria space. They had really good mac and cheese. They had homemade muffins, things like that. My absolute favorite restaurant that ever existed in the Halifax area.
Fresh 21, BK Baku's?
So what did you say after Fresh 21?
BK Baku's.
Oh, Baku. Yeah, Baku's is good. That's a Korean, I think it's chain. I think there's a couple of them, but there's one in downtown Halifax that's really good. But my favorite doesn't exist anymore. It was a place here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, just across the bridge from Halifax, called Formosa Tea House. It was an all-vegetarian dim sum Chinese restaurant. The food was delicious. It was run by this amazing person named Jeffrey Liu, who I ended up becoming very good friends with, still am good friends with. But I was very sad when that place shut down because for my money, it was the best food in Halifax. Some people may disagree, but I quite liked it.
Chris, Dag Nasty says a Black Dots presentation at Halifax North Library was accompanied by a listening station at the library information desk with a mix CD I searched out.
Yes, that's right. And I really have to give a big thank you to Ian Hart, who is one of my dearest friends. Ian was in the band No Offense, a very early 90s punk band from Halifax. Ian also played in what is, in my opinion, the best punk band ever from Halifax, which is the band The Chits. And this is the record they're probably most well known for, Break the Cycle. And Ian is pictured right here on the back of the record with three other folks from Halifax who went on to do amazing things in music. But Ian,
regarding the Chits, did he have a connection to Rule of Thumb and Blunderpuss?
Yes, I don't know. I'm not familiar with Blunderpuss, but Rule of Thumb was a really cool band that existed in Halifax in the mid to late 2000s, which featured Cara McDonald, who sang for the Chits, as well as my good friend Megan Savani, and lots of other really cool women from around Halifax as well. I miss that band very much. I saw them a few times, and they were excellent. So that would be the connection between the Chits and them. And I'm Blunderpuss, I'm not familiar with, unfortunately. I'll have to seek them out.
Right now, Chris, you have volunteered to play a Swiz as best you can over the phone for us. You're going to play a Swiz recording. What are we going to hear?
I really would love to play the song Tylenol by Swiz, because that is their song that deals the most with race relations and race issues and things like that. But that is on a record called Hell Yes, I Cheated, which is their best record I don't have it. So if anyone has that record and they want to trade with me, get at me, Sweet Belly Freakdown on Instagram. However, I'm going to play you another fantastic song by the band Swiz. It's called Ghost in the Mirror. And it's the first song, maybe on the B-side. Anyway, it's a song on their self-titled record, which I held up earlier. I'd be happy to go play it for you right now.
Well, great. I'll just put up the Black Dots promo right there and reach over for the Swiz. And please, are you still okay for time, Chris? Are you still okay for time?
I have all the time in the world.
Thank you. So here coming up is Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots and Afropunk Primer, playing some Swiz. This is some Swiz for you on Nardwuar's Video Vault Live. Amazing. Chris, just make your way back to the Nard Video Vault area. Again, you're watching, hopefully still, Nardwuar's Video Vault. Are you there, Chris?
I'm here, Nardwuar. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Thank you for being back. Thank you for being back. Again, if anybody is wondering, who are you, Chris? What are we doing right now? What are we doing right now?
My name is Chris Murdoch, and I'm a drummer from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And a couple of years ago, started this project called Black Dots, which kind of tells the story of some Black punk rockers, mostly from the 80s. And it became a speaking presentation. And then with the help of my friend Raymond and his company, Pentagon Black, it was turned into this pamphlet, Black Dots and Afropunk Primer, which you can order right now from the Pentagon Black website. If you just Google Pentagon Black, you'll find it, or there might be a URL available somewhere.
We just heard some Swiz, but Ill Hornet commented Swiz isn't on Spotify.
That is a shame. I'm trying to think. You know, it's interesting, Nardwuar, because I would tell people to go to the amazing Discord Records Bandcamp where you can listen to all the Discord bands. But Swiz actually were not on Discord, even though they were a punk band from Washington, D.C. They were on, and this is something for you, Nardwuar. I think you would appreciate this more than anyone else. They were on a label called Sammich Records. Hopefully you can see that logo there. And Sammich Records was run by Ian Mackay's sister, Amanda Mackay, along with a guy named Eli Janney, who played in a lot of DC bands and went on to play in the band Girls Against Boys, who people probably remember. But yeah, Swiz, not on Discord, but actually on Sammich. But anyway,
I love the tidbits. I love the tidbits. They are all over the Black Dots and Afropunk Primer. I love the tidbits that I didn't know thrown in there. Amazing.
Hey, my pleasure.
But what about Red Hare? There's a Swiz connection there as well.
Absolutely. And I just so happen to have a Red Hare record with me right now. This is their first record they put out called Nights of Midnight.
Like the Swiz story is quite complicated, isn't it? For band names. How does Red Hare fit into it?
I don't know why they call their band Red Hare. I really don't know. And I guess I should back up a little bit. So Swiz, we talked about Swiz. I think they're incredible, maybe in running for best band of all time along with the Bad Brains, in my opinion. And they broke up. Then they reformed briefly in the mid to late 90s as Sweet Belly Freakdown. And this is, of course, all with their new bass player, Dave. Then that band broke up. And then in, I don't know, when did this record come out? In 2012, they reformed, all the same four people, but changed the name of the band again to Red Hare. Now, Swiz sounds like a nonsense word, but my understanding is that it is a real word, and it means something that appears to be giving you something, but in reality is taking it away, which I think is quite cool. And then I know for Sweet Belly Freakdown, I don't know why they wanted to go by a different name. I just think because some years had passed and they wanted this new band to be as new as possible. And each of the four members of the band, Swiz, picked a one syllable, or not one syllable. They each picked a word, just whatever word came to their mind, a silly word, whatever. So one person picked sweet, one person picked belly, one person picked freak, and one person picked down. So they just put them together and it became Sweet Belly Freakdown. So that's how they chose that name. In terms of Red Hare, I don't know exactly how or why the name was chosen. I don't know the origins of the name, but I do know that at long last, it is on Discord Records, probably the finest record label I can think of other than Touch and Go.
Let's venture to England, the Specials, and sort of a bit of X-Ray Specs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kicking myself for not having an X-Ray Specs records to show. My collection's not what it used to be, but X-Ray Specs are most well known for a record they have called Germ Free Adolescence. I believe that's the name of the record. Anyway, I should know that. It's incredible. And of course, it features the vocal stylings of Polly Styrene, who's another incredibly inspirational Black woman in punk rock. She's featured prominently in my pamphlet and in my talk. I don't want to get into all the weeds with her right now because we don't have time, but she's an incredible person, an incredible force on stage. One of the most dynamic vocalists I've ever heard. Really amazing lyrics, things talking about crass consumerism and obsession with cleanliness and lots of things that would be tackled within punk rock later, but she was really the first to do it. Probably one of the first women involved in punk, period. One of the first to form a band. Certainly, as far as I know, the first Black woman to front a punk band. There was, what do I want to say about her? Anyway, just an amazing person. In terms of the specials, I do have a specials record here in front of me, right here. Self-titled record on Chrysalis Records, 1980. A lot of people will be familiar with this. You can see the specials. We're a ska band, reggae band, if you will. Really, you should call them a ska band. And the whole black and white motif is racially motivated as well. The band had white members and black members. Unity is kind of the main theme of the specials. So hence they only dressed in black and white clothing. If you watch their performances, which are great, they're such a great live band. Everyone's wearing black and white. The record, at least this first one, is only black and white, as you can see. Just a great band. They started kind of a whole movement in England around their label known as Two Tone, releasing a lot of other great bands, probably most notably The Selector, which featured another dynamic black woman, Pauline Black, on main vocals for that band. They also released a record by the Body Snatchers, a fantastic ska band made up completely of women with black and white members. They released records by Madness, who people will be familiar with. They released records, I believe they have a record by Bad Manners, who's another ska band from that time. Kind of just spreading the message of racial unity through England at that time. And it was well needed. There was a lot of sort of Nazi skinhead movements rising with the National Front and things like that. I think England, I've never been to England, but my understanding of England at that time, it was kind of a turbulent place. And I think the specials and their surrounding two-tone family did a lot of good in that era, which is great.
Speaking of Discord Records, Fire Party.
Oh, man. What a band. Fire Party. I just so happen to have one of their records here with me now. This record was sent to me for my birthday by my dear friends Jono and Anna, who are currently living in London, England. They sent it to me from there. So a big shout out to them. Fire Party. Here, can you even, sorry, I don't know if I'm holding it up right. Fire Party, you can see the name on the record. This is a self-titled record. It only has 6 different songs on it, but it's a brilliant record. It is on Discord, as we mentioned, and Fire Party is a record. It's a band made up completely of women, and their drummer is a black woman named Nikki Thomas. Nikki's a great drummer. Every member in this band just kills it, and I just think that it's a band. I was just kind of upset when I first heard about Fire Party because I was someone who was really interested in hardcore and punk and did a lot of deep digging to read about lots of different bands. And I never heard about Fire Party until a couple of years down the line. And I was kind of miffed as to why I never heard about them. So that's why I was upset. They're a great band. I think they did a lot to lay the foundation for what we now call the post-hardcore sound, most closely associated in that scene with Fugazi and Rites of Spring, who of course are both tremendous bands and did a lot. But I think Fire Party needs to be mentioned, next to those bands' names as well. Fire Party, the singer for Fire Party is a woman named Amy Pickering. And there's a great video online for any Fugazi fans who are watching. If you look up the Fugazi 1991 video in DC, it's them playing live at a church in DC, a multi-angle video. They play the song Suggestion, which is an anti-rape song. And a lot of times in those days when they would play it live, a woman would get on stage and sing it. And Amy gets on stage and sings it. It's a very powerful video. I would encourage people to check that out. And as far as Nikki Thomas goes, I found a recent someone on Instagram. I apologize, Nardwuar, I can't remember who, but someone was posting something about Bubba Dupree. He was being featured on an Instagram page, and they were kind of telling his story. And Nikki Thomas commented on it and said, "No Bubba, no me," which I thought was very powerful because, again, a big part of my whole Black Dots presentation is talking about how a lot of people like myself were motivated to get into music after seeing people like them do it, and they felt more comfortable. So knowing that Nikki Thomas was somewhat motivated to sort of come out of her shell as a Black punk rock musician after seeing Bubba Dupree from Void do it because it made her feel more comfortable, I think is a beautiful thing. But Fire Party are a great band, a band that never got their due. People should listen to them. And you can hear, I believe, every Fire Party release for free on the Discord Records Bandcamp. So I'd encourage people to do that.
And we're live here with Chris Murdoch talking about his pamphlet, Black Dots, an Afropunk Primer. And actually, there's a comment for you by Big Nicky 666. And Big Nicky says, when I was in junior high, I had a pen pal from Florida who introduced me to some of these bands via mixtapes. So shout out to that guy and shout out to Chris. Thank you for this. Hi from Dartmouth.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, your pen pal, whoever it was, sounds like they were pretty right on.
And if anybody has any questions for Chris, put at Nardwuar in the chat so I see them, and Chris can answer any questions, as you basically have answered everything I've wanted to know about punk rock. Like, you have a huge selection in this actual pamphlet. Let's have a better view of the pamphlet right now. Right now, a better view. I actually have a nice view of the pamphlet right now. Also, enough YDI.
Oh yeah. Boy, I wish I had the records to show. I don't, but Enough were a great band from New Jersey. I think they were a straight edge band, and they played a lot of shows with a lot of bands in that late 80s straight edge tri-state area scene in the States. So, Youth of Today and Judge and bands like that. Enough would play. Enough was fronted by a guy named AJ. God, I can't remember his last name. I feel really bad. Anyway, brilliant frontman. They have one demo, I believe, recorded in 1988. You can hear it for free online. I know it's on YouTube. What do I want to say about Enough? Enough have a demo from 1988. Enough's drummer was a guy named Ari Katz, who went on to sing in a band called Lifetime, which I know a lot of people are big fans of. And Enough is one of the very few bands from that late 80s New York hardcore era to not get a full reissue of their record. There are a lot of reissues these days of bands from that time. Youth of Today, Chain of Strength, they're not from New York, but bands in that milieu. I think maybe they did get a reissue a year or so ago, but for a long time, after a lot of those bands got reissues, we didn't see one from Enough. Maybe because, to my knowledge, they only have a 6-song demo, but it's a really great demo. AJ James is the name of their front person. And they're a fantastic band. Now, Wide-Eye are from Philadelphia.
Sorry for getting that name wrong. I called it Wide-Eye.
No problem, Nardwuar. Wide-Eye are an incredible band. When I tell people about Wide-Eye, I like to refer to them as your mother's worst nightmare, because Wide-Eye were very much into shock value, and kind of in a way, they're somewhat like the Misfits. Like, a lot of their songs are about horror movies or horror-themed elements. So they have songs. They have a song called I Killed My Family. They have a song called Murder Is So Sweet. They started as a proper hardcore band, like a really, really great hardcore band. The guitar player did some really interesting things. I'm not a guitar player, so I don't know exactly what the terminology is to use, but they kind of stood out from the pack a little bit. Their singer is a black guy who goes by the name of Jackal. That was his stage name. And their drummer was also black. I think his name was Howard, but I can't 100% remember. And he I think was only in the band for a certain amount of time. Wide-Eye have a great record called A Place in the Sun. Again, really shocking, hateful lyrics. A very, very angry band. Touching on some controversial topics too, which I don't necessarily agree with, but shock value is the name of their game. And then Wide-Eye, like many of the other bands that we talked about, kind of morphed into somewhat of a metal band, and they put out a record, I think, called Black Dust, which is a little bit different from some of the stuff they did earlier, but still with that whole theme of horror and murder and stuff like that. So a really cool band, but not for everyone. That is for sure. Oh, and they played, I first heard about Wide-Eye because I'm a big Glenn Danzig fan, and I was listening to an old Sam Hain interview, Glenn's band after the Misfits, an old radio interview where they were talking about how they were playing shows with this band Wide-Eye. And then I looked up Wide-Eye from there, and that's how I came to know about them.
And if anybody is wondering, right now, this is Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots and Afropunk Primer. So I was going to actually return to Halifax for a second, if that's okay. Jellyfish Babies. Were they a hardcore band? Did they start off hardcore and then turn into more of a Soul Asylum vibe?
Yeah, definitely. And Jellyfish Babies are a band that I'm not as familiar with. I've learned a lot about them from my friend Ian, who I mentioned before. And Jellyfish Babies started as more of a traditional punk band, I guess you could say. I'm friends with their original drummer, who's a woman by the name of Colleen Britton, who still lives in here in Halifax. And they played shows. This is way before my time, right? I was a baby, or perhaps not even born when they were playing shows. But they played around Halifax for a couple of years, playing kind of their more punk stuff, which is what they originally wrote. And then they relocated without Colleen. I don't know exactly where they went, but once they relocated, they started making music that was, like you say, a bit more in the vein of Soul Asylum and bands like that. And they're featured on the Out of the Fog compilation, which is probably one of the best known. I don't know if you totally call it a punk record, but one of the best compilations, or one of the best known compilations from Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that comp. False Security, dog food. What can you say about dog food and false security? They're on that comp, Out of the Fog, put out by CKDU, where I think you do a radio show, right?
I used to. I did a show there for a couple of years, which was a lot of fun. And I grew up listening to CKDU, so it was really, I was thrilled to be able to do that show there. I had a show called Out of Vogue. It was a punk show. Out of the Fog, was a compilation. Some punk-ish stuff on it, some stuff that was a little bit more out there, but it's a great compilation. I don't know anything about dog food, unfortunately, but False Security is a band that I learned a lot about from my friend Ian, and they were more of a traditional hardcore band, I think maybe with some more melodic leanings in some of their music. But I will say that compilation also features a band called, I believe they're called The October Game, and the singer for that band is Sarah McLachlan, who of course ended up relocating to your neck of the woods out there in BC. But she is from Halifax. She went to Queen Elizabeth High School here in Halifax with my friend Ian from the band No Offense.
And you were Chris Murdoch from Dartmouth. And we have a question for you, Chris. That happened for real. That happened for real asks, did he, meaning you, Chris, talk about D.H. Peligro already? If not, can he? Because you said one of the early songs you sung was a Dead Kennedy song.
That's right. Yeah, D.H. Peligro is, in my opinion, one of the best punk rock drummers of all time. And before I was even aware of the Bad Brains, I had seen footage. I'll admit the reason I saw this Dead Kennedys footage was because it was on the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 game for Sony PlayStation, which came out when I was 12 years old, something like that. But anyway, they have footage in the opening credits of the video game of the Dead Kennedys, and I know you know Jello Biafra quite well, Nardwuar. Footage of them playing the song Police Truck, which is the song I sang at that show. And every now and again, the camera would pan to their drummer, and I was kind of squinting, being like, is that a black guy? Because again, I was really a big fan of rock music. I was just getting into punk at that time. And as far as I knew, there were no black punks. As far as I knew at that time, it was a thing that didn't exist. So even before the Bad Brains, D.H. Peligro was probably the first black punk I ever heard of. But of course, he would go on to be a prominent member of Dead Kennedys, featured on a lot of the records, just an excellent drummer, excellent musician. And that's my story on D.H. Peligro.
What about early Chris Murphy from Sloan punk rock? Like him doing Whiteout, Aware, Spent, which you can find on the internet. Chris Murphy, punk rock.
Chris Murphy, I've never heard Whiteout, but I know that Whiteout made a pilgrimage down to DC, I think specifically to visit the Discord house, which is pretty cool for a group of people from Halifax to do that. Speaking of Chris Murphy, who is, of course, best known for the band Sloan, and Sloan had their own label, Murder Records, who now have a really cool Instagram page. I don't know if Murder Records are still in production or if the Instagram page is just sort of a recollection of what they've done. But of course, they've released a lot of amazing, important records. And Stephanie, my wife, who we were just talking to, used to work at Murder Records back in the 90s. So I thought, when she told me that, I thought that was pretty cool. Chris, I don't know much about Aware. I have heard the band Spent, and my friend Colleen Britton, who played drums in Jellyfish Babies, also played drums in the band Spent. Spent are not really a traditional punk band, if you will. They were kind of doing some more experimental stuff, but I think Spent are a great band. And of course, then the guys from Sloan were in the band Kearney Lake Road. I know Patrick from Sloan was in this band called The Convulsions, who have a song called Kill the Kmart Clerk. And I found all this out from my friend Ian. And if people are interested to hear some of these bands like the Convulsions, for example, if you go to YouTube and you search Atlantic Canada Punk, you will find a channel by the same name, and that channel is run by my dear friend Ian, and he's uploaded the vast majority of any Halifax stuff that we've talked about. So if people want to hear the Chits, or they want to hear those early projects of the guys from Sloan, or any of that early Halifax punk rock, Ian has tons and tons and tons of it on his channel. So again, it's Atlantic Canada Punk, and people should really check it out. There's a lot of really cool stuff that he's been uploading, especially in the last couple of months.
Shout out to Ian. Ian is amazing documenting all this. It's amazing.
He is amazing.
And you were maybe going to have Ian over at your house, but due to COVID protocols, it didn't happen. But thank you for bringing Stephanie down. Thank you for bringing Stephanie down. And you are, again, Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots, an Afropunk primer from Dartmouth, but Halifax Punk. Do you have a bunch of Halifax punk records? Moral Support, System Overload, the Quahogs.
Yeah, I don't. Moral Support are one of my favorite hardcore bands ever from Halifax, and they recorded a demo that is kind of infamous. And the reason it's infamous is because it's extremely hard to find, and most people have not heard it. I don't know the full story, but shortly after they recorded it, something happened, and it was not largely released. So even people like Ian, who were around in the late 80s to actually see Moral Support live, a lot of those folks have not actually heard the demo. I don't know why. But there is a recording of them playing a live show, I think, in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and that show is incredible. They are just a ripping band, just a frenzied, ripping band, harsh vocals. They cover 12XU at that show. And they're just great. I think Moral Support are fantastic. The Quahogs, I do have a record of right here. The Quahogs are a much different kind of punk band. They're a very poppy band, brilliant band. I think, unfortunately, their singer passed a few years ago, which I just found out from Ian, so that's very sad. But Quahogs, for people who are perhaps interested to check out some of the stuff, but are not really so much into hardcore because maybe it's a little bit too much for them, I would encourage them to listen to Quahogs, and you can find Quahogs on YouTube by searching Ian's channel. It's very catchy. It's very poppy stuff. It's wonderful. Really great band. And Quahogs were on Cinnamon Toast Records, which is a very well-known label here in Halifax. It was run, I think, primarily by a guy named Walter Forsyth, but also my friend Sean Duggan ran the label along with a group of other people. Cinnamon Toast Records, perhaps best known for putting out some releases by the band Plumtree, who I believe you have interviewed before, Nardwuar, one of Halifax's best-known exports and a fantastic band. Four amazing women. Well, actually five. They had two
inspiration for a movie.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. The Scott Pilgrim movie. Yeah, that's right. Another really cool early punk band from Halifax is this band, Boo by Skull. This is their Insects 7-inch, kind of a goth-tinged band, if you will. I don't know much about them. One of their vocalists is a woman named Alison Outhit, who ended up writing for Exclaim and a lot of other publications. And Alison Outhit's nephew is a guy named Dexter Outhit, who is very well known here in the Halifax punk scene because he's a brilliant drummer and has played in a lot of bands, including a band that I sang for called Word on the Street. And I know I'm doing some shameless self-promotion, Nardwuar, but you said it was okay to mention a record I'm on, so I wanted to mention that because Dexter has a connection to Boo by Skull, which is pretty cool. And Boo by Skull, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I it's much before my time, but I found this record years ago, and this is also on Cinnamon Toast. In fact, this Boo by Skull record is the very first record to ever come out on Cinnamon Toast, I think. I think this is the first Cinnamon Toast release. But these days, Cinnamon Toast is mostly known for Plumtree, which I think is just fine.
No Offense had a split with the Shitheads on En Garde. A split with the Shitheads.
Yeah, No Offense was a band that Ian was in. I think it was Ian's first serious band, if you will, and they were a traditional sounding punk band, punk hardcore band here in Halifax in the early 90s. And the Shitheads, I'm not as familiar with. I think, again, they kind of have like when I say the word punk band, whatever sounds come to your mind, that's kind of what the Shitheads sound like. I don't know all the members of the Shitheads, but I do know two of them very well. One of them was a guy named Derek Hiltz, who ended up playing drums for the Chits, who we already talked about. He was also in a number of other bands from Halifax, including Gilbert Switzer, who are a very well-known band from here. which also featured my friend Megan, who played in Rule of Thumb and a lot of other great bands. And another guy who was in the Shitheads is a guy named Derek McAlone, but he's known here in Halifax as D-Rock. And the Shitheads morphed into this band called System Shit, who are a much more abrasive, crusty, grind-influenced band and it's kind of D-Rock's legacy band. It's had a few lineup changes. D-Rock actually lives in your neck of the woods now, Nardwuar, up there in BC. But System Shit was a band that I saw as a young guy a lot of times at all ages shows. And it was known as being kind of a legacy band because they just had existed for so long here in Halifax. So that's kind of mostly what I know about the Shitheads.
We are speaking here to Chris Murdoch, the author of Black Dots, an Afropunk primer. It's a pamphlet, though. It's a pamphlet because this question is from Charlie. And Charlie asks, hello there. Does Chris's book, it's not a book. You've done a talk, but this is not a book. Does Chris's book talk exclusively about performers, or does it also talk about people behind the scenes, writers, promoters, fans, etc.? He mentions Don Letts.
So the pamphlet, just because it is a pamphlet and had to be small, only features 4 people. Polystyrene from X-Ray Specs, Chuck Treese from McRad, and who's a skateboarder, Bubba Dupree from Void, and Tony Young from Red Sea. But in my Black Dot speaking presentation, I do mention a lot of other people, and Don Letts is one of them. And, in my presentation, I talk about how Don Letts is widely responsible for the connection that still exists today between punk music and reggae music. Seems like an unlikely filtering between the two, but Don Letts would DJ at punk clubs in London back in the early days. And in between bands, like in between the Buzzcocks and Wire and Generation X and bands like that, he would play these dub records. So a lot of these white punk kids from London and the surrounding area got a taste for dub and reggae. And it's 100% because of Don Letts. And Don also ended up being in one of the first ever punk bands to feature Black people, to my knowledge, a band called Basement 5. They have a really great single called Last White Christmas, which people should check out online. Also, in my talk, I mentioned a woman, Simone Thomas. And Simone Thomas was a Black woman, not really known for being a musician, but she was a member of the Bromley Contingent, which was a group of young punk kids, essentially kind of the first punk rockers, in my opinion, a group of kids who would go to Sex Pistols shows. They're kind of the first punk fans. Susie Sue was in the Bromley Contingent. Billy Idol was in the Bromley Contingent, during the time he was fronting the band Generation X. But another person in this contingent was a Black woman by the name of Simone Thomas, which I always make the point in my presentation that a lot of people, certainly can't imagine a Black person being involved in punk rock. At least in my experience, that was a lot of what people said to me. And I think the notion of a Black woman in punk rock is especially shocking to people. And part of the evidence that I use to help people understand that it shouldn't be shocking is to let them know that one of the first punks ever was a Black woman. And if you, people who like the Sex Pistols are probably familiar with when they went on the Bill Grundy show. And they swore on television, and the tabloids in London came out talking about the filth and the fury and kind of advanced their career from there because they swore on live television. They swore at Bill Grundy. It's a very famous clip. It's easy to find online, but Bill Grundy's show was an afternoon, like tea time show that a lot of middle-aged Londoners would tune into. And that interview that he did with the Sex Pistols was a lot of people's first introduction to punk rock. And behind the Sex Pistols are the kids from the Bromley Contingent, including Simone Thomas. So again, when punk rock was a brand new thing that nobody had heard of before and people were tuning in to check it out, one of the first people they ever see involved with this whole new punk movement is a Black woman, which I think is pretty cool.
And we're speaking here to Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots, an Afropunk primer. And actually, Biodomer comments in the chat, I own a pamphlet and I'm still learning more tonight. Always love spending time with Chris.
That is my friend and coworker, Tony, and I appreciate him tuning in. And he is an awesome human being. Thank you, Tony.
Where is Tony from? Dartmouth? Halifax? Where
Tony
is
is-
he based?
Tony is from a place called Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from Halifax. It's a beautiful part of Nova Scotia.
Returning to Halifax, winding up her with Chris Murdoch. What about some other Halifax bands that have released stuff like T-shirts or cassettes? FYM, the Bougie Boys, the Vikings.
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, if I want to talk about some great bands from Halifax, some of which still exist, and I'll mention that I am in a band right now. If people want to hear it, we have no physical releases, but I'm in a band called Souvenir. Not so much a punk band, but more influenced by sort of 90s alternative bands like Silkworm and Dinosaur Jr. and stuff like that. So if you're interested to hear it, it's at souvenirhfx.bandcamp.com. But I really want to talk about the band FYM. You can see their self-titled 7-inch here. FYM stands for Free Your Mind. Easily one of the best bands from Halifax ever. And they were on a label called Sub-Profit Records, which is run by a guy named Richard LaFortune, who was in that band, the Chits. He released records by some other notable Halifax bands. A really amazing band called Led by Regret has a release on his label. Equation of State have a release on his label. That's another one of Ian's bands. But FYM is a really kind of, it's a very poppy band. It's kind of a skate punk band, if you will. They have songs on here about skateboarding, like Animal Chin, which is a reference to a character in a very early skate video, which people might be aware of. And they have a song, The Bowl, which is literally about a skate bowl, like a concrete bowl on the Halifax Commons that people have skated here for years. But my favorite local band ever is a band that was just known as Vikings. And they spelled it like this with no vowels. And I think this is their first release. I think it's just self-titled. It's excellent. They're just a crushing, very, the precision-based band. I don't really know how to describe their sound. I suppose you could say it's post-hardcore sound, but it's a little bit heavier than that. Great band. They don't exist anymore. One of the best bands in Halifax right now is a punk band, an amazing punk band called the Bougie Boys. And they have a few records out on Drunken Sailor Records out of Europe. This is a record they released called Weekend Rocker, but they have other really great records as well. Just 5 super talented musicians from Halifax. My dear friend Cody Gugu plays guitar in this band, and he also played in the band Word on the Street with me and has played in tons and tons of bands here in Halifax. But if I was going to promote Halifax punk rock, like currently, to somebody right now, if they needed one band to check out, I would tell them to listen to this band and especially this record. There's a couple other Halifax bands I could talk about quickly, Nardwuar, unless we should talk about something else.
Well, I was actually going to ask about Discontrol, and they recorded at Charles Austin's place. What can you say about Charles Austin doing a lot of recording?
I'm a huge fan of Charles Austin. The only reason I'm looking to the side, Nardwuar, is because Stephanie is texting me. I don't want to miss any of it. And she wants me to let you know that she actually played bass in Vikings for a show or two, which is pretty cool. Charles Austin did record Discontrol. He recorded this, which is, in my humble opinion, one of the best records ever to come out of Halifax. It's a record by the band Discontrol. It's called Living Without. Before I talk about Discontrol, I'll talk about Charles. Charles Austin recorded my band Souvenir. We have an EP and a full length. He recorded both of them. He played in a band called the Super Friends, who were on Murder Records with Sloan and Thrush Hermit and Eric's Trip and all those great bands. And Charles is just a salt of the earth, just wonderful person, super easy to work with, like the easiest recording sessions I've ever done. He has a great studio here in Halifax that he runs with another great guy called Ocean Floor. It's right in the downtown area. And if anybody in Halifax is looking to do some recording, I would definitely encourage you to do it there and do it with them because they do a great job. Discontrol is an amazing band that features my good friend Lockie McDonald on guitar and vocals. He plays in the band Souvenir with me now, along with our other friend Dave. But it also features Dave Brown on drums, who played in Career Suicide and lots of amazing punk bands from Halifax and from a place called Truro, Nova Scotia, which is about an hour north from Halifax. And they have their own scene going on up there for quite a while, which is really cool that such a small place would have their own distinct punk scene, but they did. The original bass player was a guy named Alex Mitchell, who is pictured here because now he sings in Bougie Boys. And they went on to have a bass player, Noel McDonald, who I actually work with now, who's a brilliant musician. He has his own project called Washing Machine. So lots of really great music coming out of Halifax. But again, if I was going to narrow down Halifax records for someone not familiar with Halifax to check out, this would be on my list, no question. I think this is just a beautiful, crushing record, and people should check it out. We talked a bit about Out of Controller, another one of my all-time favorite bands from Halifax. This is their first LP, Don't Play Dumb, my personal favorite. Their second LP features me on drums. I did join the band for about 3 years. And again, I'm on great terms with those guys. I only left because I had kids and they were looking to tour more, and those two things don't always go together. But they have 3 LPs and lots of other releases out right now. And they're just a fantastic band, super hooky. I suppose you could call them a power pop band, but I don't want to limit them too much because they do lots of other great stuff as well. And I think they're working on their 4th LP right now. Those guys never stop working. Myself and my friend Maddie, who played bass, we both left the band at the same time, and then they got a new rhythm section who are just killer, and they're just an unstoppable force. They're a brilliant band here in Halifax. And the last Haligonian record I wanted to show you is from another one of my all-time favorite Halifax bands, which existed just in the last decade, and that's a band called Alienation. This band features my friend Dylan Jewers on vocals. The vocals are perfect. I think the vocals are what drew me into the band initially, but this is a ripping fast hardcore band from Halifax. They have a few releases, but this is my personal favorite, the 2015 mini LP. Cody Gugu, who's in Bougie Boys and a lot of the other bands I mentioned, is also in this band. And what can you say? Just a fantastic.
Well, I was wondering about Alienation. I noticed they played the Memorial North Library. Like they played a library.
They did. They played. I don't know how many shows have been at that library, but there was at least one really cool punk show there that they played along with a couple other really, really good bands. And that's the same library that I did the first version of my Black Dots presentation at, which culminated in a show in their parking garage, I think, which is really cool. But yeah, Alienation, again, if someone's looking to check out Halifax punk in general, especially Halifax hardcore, this is one of the best hardcore records to ever come out of Halifax. And my good buddy who plays guitar in this band, or played guitar, I don't know if they still exist, his actual name is Steve Earle, not to be confused with Copperhead Road Steve Earle. And
boom.
And my friend Dave Brown went on to play drums in this band, and he's also in Discontrol and a lot of other great bands as well. He played in Career Suicide from Toronto for a while. I want to give him his due as well.
And we're speaking here to Chris Murdoch, author of Black Dots and Afropunk Primer. But right now, we're talking a bit about Halifax punk rock. I was curious, Chris, are you the only black punk rocker in Halifax?
That's a really good question because Halifax is a small place. And I'm really glad you asked that, Nardwuar, because a big part of the reason why I was willing to turn this whole thing into a presentation and move forward with it is because I wanted to talk about the fact that even though Halifax is so tiny, and even though I dealt with a lot of racism and discrimination and things like that getting into the punk scene, there have always been, at least from the time I started going to shows 20 years ago, other Black people and other people of color in the punk scene here in Halifax, which is really cool. So the first person I ever encountered was this guy named John Samuel, who had this amazing band called Slight Return. He's been in a lot of other great bands too. I'm just, there's a lot of, I don't want to just go down a Rolodex of names, but Out of Controller right now features my friend AJ Bootlier on bass. He has a lot of great bands. He's in a band called Designosaur. He's in a brand new band called Book Buddies. But that's another Black punk musician. There's so many, and just going down the list of, again, I don't want to do a list of names, so don't want to leave anybody out, but there's so many. My friend Bria Miller played bass in this band Rabies, who are amazing. My friend, who else is there? There's a lot of bands that feature that. My friend Darren played in this great band called Make No Gains. He's in Toronto now with a new band. There are so many. I shouldn't say there are so many. Of course, there are actually so few. There's probably less than 10. But just the fact that we've always been around, at least in the last couple of decades, I think is pretty notable. Again, considering how small Halifax is, and as you can imagine, the punk scene here is very much predominantly white. But there's people who've been sticking around. I'm going to feel horrible if I forget to mention somebody, and I probably will, just because I'm nervous talking to you and I can't think of it. I know there's another guy who's a little bit more in the metal scene. He had a band called Fist Fight and a band called Chalk Pit. I don't remember his name, but I want to mention him.
You're welcome to come on the Nardwuar Video Vault the next time on Friday if you want. Like, you can come on every week. If you forget somebody, feel free. Yes, Nardwuar the Human Serviette is on Nardwuar's Video Vault every Friday at 3:30, every Monday at 3:30, 6:30 Eastern, I guess 7:30 your time in Halifax, Nova Scotia. You are welcome. So if you've forgotten anything, Chris, feel free to come on another week on Twitch, joining me on Twitch. I was curious, are you good at loading the dishwasher?
I think I am. I think maybe a little too good, because Stephanie will tell you that I am very anal when it comes to loading the dishwasher. I have a method, I have a system that I use when I load the dishwasher, and I think I inherited it from my dad, because she would tell you the same thing about him. So Nardwuar, I might be a little bit too good at loading the dishwasher. I probably should step down my dishwasher game a little bit.
I was curious, Chris, your drum set, it was really old. Did anybody ever play your drum set in the 60s in a band? What was the name of the band that used your drum set?
I don't know what the name of the band was, but I can show you parts of that drum set if you'd like, Nardwuar. I have the drum set right here beside me, and you can see under here, I don't know if maybe this is a terrible idea, but this floor tom, especially this white floor tom, is from that drum set.
No, please move it closer, because you're going to play some Fire Party for us, right? You're going to play some Fire Party, right, to end the interview. Yeah. We're gonna, so yes, you definitely have to move the camera anyways, so just move it towards the drums. True. Yeah, if you could, please.
Sure, yeah. So this I don't want to show too much of my messy basement because Stephanie will kill me. But I will show you, this is just the kit we use at home. My little kids, I have a 3 and a 5-year-old who like to play it. But this floor tom here, how do I make you see the floor tom? This floor tom here is very old. It's an old tom by a company called Coronet, who I don't think make drums anymore. And when I was first learning to play drums, my parents didn't think that it would be something I would be doing well into my 30s. So they didn't want to spend too much money on it. So my dad had a friend who had this white Coronet drum set up in his attic that had been there for years and years. Because I don't know who played it, but I know the drum kit was made in the 60s and had been up in his attic, I think, since that time. And my dad bought it for maybe $200. So most of that kit is gone, but I still have the floor tom. It sounds terrible.
But you don't know if it was played with a garage band. A garage band might have played that?
Oh, I think for sure. Yeah, I think for sure. And it was a really interesting kit. The bass drum head was like this big wooden mallet. It was just really bizarre. The ride cymbal was made by a company called Krut, Krut, which I think was based in Germany. They don't make cymbals anymore. But I remember my drum teacher telling me that they existed for a while and then ended up changing their name, because in the first couple of years of their existence, they didn't realize that Krut sounds, in English, sounds a lot like crud or crap or something that's not desirable. So I thought that was kind of funny when I was 13 years old.
Thank you so much, Chris, for zooming in to the Nardwuar the Human Serviette Video Vault and turning your camera towards your drums. Some of the chatters did notice, quote, "Is that a car bed?"
Yeah, Stephanie's going to kill me. This thing behind me is a race car bed that my son Maceo slept in for a couple of years. He's too big for it now. And my other son, Desmond, who's 3, might grow into it, or he might give it to somebody who would like to have it. It was given to me by my old boss. And it's something that we want to hold on to, but there's nowhere to put it. So it lives here in the storage room, which is where I'm broadcasting to you from now. So yes, that is a light blue race car bed. If any friends in the Halifax area are watching and they need a race car bed, let me know, because I have one right here.
And Chris, could you tell people a bit more about, just lastly here, in case they're just joining us, Black Dots and Afropunk Primer?
Yeah. Black Dots and Afropunk Primer, you can see it right here. It's a pamphlet showcasing 4 different artists, sort of black punk musicians that I really think are inspirational and I really respect. Born out of sort of like this photograph project, I guess you could say, that I did on Instagram. which evolved into a speaking presentation, and the speaking presentation evolved into the pamphlet. So the pamphlet, it tells some of my personal story, unlike the speaking presentation, and then it focuses in on these 4 individuals from different bands, and just people who I think should be explored a little bit more. And if people want to order the pamphlet, they can still order it anytime they want to online from Pentagon Black. As far as the speaking presentation, I am booked to do a virtual version of it later on this month. The person who's organizing that, I don't know if I have clearance to say when or where it's going to happen, but it's, as far as I know, it's happening later this month. So if people want to, they can reach out to me for that. And if anybody wants to reach out to me for anything, they can find me on Instagram at Sweet Belly Freakdown.
What are we going to end with right now? Fire party. You're going to grab the phone again, grab the computer and show more the car. But what is going to happen now? We're going to play some Fire Party, right?
We're going to play Fire Party, which again featured a brilliant Black woman named Nikki Thomas on the drum. She does a really cool roll at the beginning of the song we're going to hear. It's the first song on the B-side of their self-titled record. It's called Drowning Intentions. And again, if folks are not familiar with Fire Party, I would very strongly encourage them to check the band out.
What song are we going to hear from Fire Party? What song are we going to hear?
Drowning Intentions.
Chris, why should people care about Chris Murdoch? Why should people care?
People should not care about Chris Murdoch, but I think people should care about some of the musicians that we talked about today, especially if, people who are fans of guitar-based music in general. I think a lot of people know that Black people had a pivotal role to play in the creation of rock and roll, but I think a lot of people think of punk or hardcore punk as being a largely white form of music because that's who you see at the show. And also it's music that doesn't feel immediately derivative of the blues. If people hear Led Zeppelin, it's easy to hear that they were influenced or are perhaps ripping off Black artists. But when you listen to a hardcore punk band, you don't get that in your ear. And I just think that Black people had quite a role to play in punk rock's evolution and, in hardcore, bands that we talked about, like the Bad Brains, people like Skeeter Thompson and Scream, people like Sean Brown from Dag Nasty and Swiz. I think it's important for people to know, Black vocalists who talked about their own pain and alienation, using punk rock as a platform to do so. I just think anybody who has any interest in punk at all just should be aware that, Black people play a role in punk. And I think, if I can, Nardwuar, I think my main message really here is that punk and really any form of music is for everybody. So, I'm Black, so that's why I'm talking about Black people, but anybody from any ethnic background or any culture or whatever should feel at home in punk, especially because it's for everybody. And if someone, regardless of who you are, if you have an interest in a certain type of music, I don't feel that you should be alienated. You should, people should feel free to be into whatever the heck they're into. That's kind of the main message of my whole thing with Black Dot. So hopefully people are taking that away from it.
Thank you so much for zooming in, Chris. Really appreciate it. Right now, we got coming up some Fire Party. Keep on.
Absolutely. I can.
Sorry, yeah. If you could eventually show some Fire Party, but I guess right now, keep on rocking in the free world and Doot toodaloo.
Doot.
Here on Nardwuar's Video Vault every Monday and every Friday, 3:30 p.m. Pacific, 6:30 Eastern Time. Now, if you're watching way back when, today, You would have seen me unbox, thank you, Nina, this gift that was sent to me by Alex Taylor. It's a magazine from Quebec from 1966. That's a garage band, Goliath, from 1966, filled with pictures of 1960s garage bands from Quebec. Totally and completely rare. Especially this picture. I mean, look at this picture. Incredible. A lot of these bands you can possibly Google on YouTube and see them performing because there's a lot of evidence of them performing. So check these guys out on YouTube. So Alex sent me this magazine. Amazing. And in this magazine, again, you're like, well, what the hell? Why care about this magazine? Well, the thing is, you've seen pictures of the records, but you've never seen pictures of the actual people in actual magazines. So les excentriques, les Napoléons, les gendarmes. Amazing. And also, which I did notice when I first unboxed, to me, this is a holy grail. Because I have not seen pictures of these bands ever except on records. And to see them in magazines, it's incredible. This is Quebecois, 1966. Les Miserables, Les Jaguars. Take a note of what they're wearing. Les Jaguars. And my favorite, Caesar and the Romans. Caesar and the Romans. Incredible. I've never seen pictures of them in the wild. Thank you, Alex, for sending this to me. Now, I have seen records, and I've played for you, Les Jaguars. Notice what she's wearing. Kind of not quite what they were wearing, but still, it's amazing. These are the bands from 1966 or so, 65 from Quebec, Quebecois rock and roll. Caesar and the Romans. And Les Excentriques. So I thought, to end Nardwuar's video vault today, yes, I would go back to, well, actually, I've never played them, Caesar et les Romans. With Splish Splash, which I think you know that tune. But to play this record, I'll have to clean it. But thank you again for tuning in to Nardwuar's Video Vault. And thank you again, Chris, for spending time with me and you guys in the chat for Nardwuar's Video Vault. And thank you, Alex Taylor, for the gift, and John Davis. So right now, I'm going to grab the camera, clean the record, and play it on the Jukebox Jamboree, which, as you can see, I have to mic the speaker to get the output happening. Doot-doo-loot-doo. Doot-doo. So here we go from Quebec, 1966, maybe 65. Caesar and the Romans. With Splish Splash, and this goes out to, again, John Davis and Alex Taylor, who sent me that amazing magazine with out in the wild pictures of Quebecois garage rockers from the 1960s. And that magazine is from 1966. Amazing. On Nardwuar's Video Vault. Do 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 do.